Namaste, good morning, and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritam cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha. We salute Sri Ramakrishna, God of gods and Lord of existence, who of his own free will took on human birth and lived a luminous life of divine play for the destruction of human ills. We salute that incarnation, Paramahamsa Ramakrishna, who was worshipped by pure-hearted disciples like Vivekananda, and who was ceaselessly served by Sri Sharada Devi, the Divine Mother herself. Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhidiritam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Jana. O Lord, your nectar-like words are praised by the wise and full of grace. They destroy the curse of evil, bring good to those who hear them, and bring new life to those who are scorched by the ills of worldly existence. Magnanimous indeed are they who spread your message. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning we will continue our reading of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We are on September 22nd, 1883, and one-third of the way down on page 291. So Sri Ramakrishna had been speaking to Ishan and other devotees who were present on that day. And he'd been talking about renunciation, inner and outer renunciation, how inner renunciation is needed by the householder. I once said to Keshab, how can a typhoid patient be cured if he remains in a room where a pitcher of water and a jar of pickles are kept? Now and then one should live in solitude. So this is something that Sri Ramakrishna often said, and he often referred to the example of the typhoid patient who apparently, I'm not familiar with typhoid, but apparently one has to be very careful about one's water consumption during typhoid, or at least at that time that was considered part of the treatment. And so Sri Ramakrishna said, how can a typhoid patient be cured if they're kept in a room where there's water and a jar of pickles? The pickles, because it would make the mouth water and make one thirsty. And so comparing that to living in the world in the midst of the objects of temptation. So how can we transcend the senses when we're constantly being confronted, living in the midst of things which are attracting our minds? And so he would say, one needs to go from time to time into solitude in order to practice spiritual discipline and to mature the mind. Because when we're outside of our usual comfort zone, then it's easier to think in new terms and to give a new direction to the mind and to emphasize spiritual practice. When we're in the midst of our ordinary circumstances, those are the circumstances in which we have formed our present habits, which we find difficult to break. And so, if we're constantly living in the midst of the circumstances which reinforce our habits of mind and action, then it's very hard to change them. So if we take ourselves outside of those circumstances, go to a solitary place where we're not going to be engaged socially and have responsibilities that we have to take care of and so forth, then we can give our minds more easily to spiritual practice for a few days. As Sri Ramakrishna would say elsewhere, for a day, for a weekend, for a week, but for some time, once in a while, householders need to go into solitude. So then there's a change of subject, because a devotee asks him, "Sir, what do you think of the Navavidhan? It seems to me like a hodgepodge of everything." So the Navavidhan was the reform movement within the reform movement of the Brahmo Samaj. There was the Brahmo Samaj, which Keshab had been a leader of the Brahmo Samaj, Keshab Chandra Sen, but then he gave his daughter in marriage to the Prince of Kuch Bihar when she was not yet of the marriageable age according to the reforms of the Brahmo Samaj. She was quite marriageable according to the customs in society at that time, though she was quite young, like 12 or something like that. But according to the reform movement of the Brahmo Samaj, they were not in favor of that type of early betrothal of ones who were still children. And yet, though he was leader of the Brahmo Samaj, Keshab Chandra Sen did this, which offended the other Brahmo members. And so he had to more or less leave and found a new branch of the Brahmo Samaj. He was, as we know, a world famous religious leader, famous all over India, very famous in Bengal. Practically everyone in Bengal, except for the uneducated and the rural population, everyone was in some way or another influenced by Keshab and his ideas. At least they were conversant with him and his ideas. And the disciples who started coming to Sri Ramakrishna from the time of 1879, 1880, 81, and forward, they had been deeply influenced by Keshab Chandra Sen. And it was through Keshab Chandra Sen that Sri Ramakrishna became known to the public. So Sri Ramakrishna had great love for Keshab, and he also had he was a deep influence over Keshab's evolving religious ideas. His ideas never evolved to the point where he could accept everything that Sri Ramakrishna taught, but he evolved a great deal, and that was through the influence of Sri Ramakrishna. So Navavidhan means a new dispensation. So because he had to leave the Brahmo Samaj and form his own branch of the Brahmo Samaj, then of course you have to come up with a new name. So that was Navavidhan, the new dispensation. And the old Brahmo Samaj took the name Adi Brahmo Samaj, or the beginning, the original Brahmo Samaj. So again, let me start over again. The devotee asks, "Sir, what do you think of the Navavidhan? It seems to me like a hodgepodge of everything." Master, some say it is a modern thing. That sets me wondering. Then is the God of the Brahmo Samaj a new God? The Brahmos speak of their cult as the Navavidhan, the new dispensation. Well, it may be so. Who knows? There are 6 systems of philosophy, so perhaps it is like one of these. Sri Ramakrishna, he was not much impressed with making new religious movements. In fact, he said about Narendra, his favored disciple and the greatest of his disciples, Narendra, the future Vivekananda, he said that had Narendra not come to this place, meaning to him, to Sri Ramakrishna, then he had the power to form a new religion. And indeed, that doesn't mean he would have been the founder of something like the Brahmo Samaj or the Arya Samaj or something like that. No, Narendra Vivekananda had the power of a Buddha, the power of a Buddha or the power of a Jesus to start a whole new world religious movement. He had that power within him, and Sri Ramakrishna recognized it. But he said, because he's come to this place, the Divine Mother has will through him will create a wave of spirituality that will do good to everyone. And so instead of creating a new religion to compete with other religions, Swamiji would become a powerful influence of spirituality itself. So Sri Ramakrishna was, again, not in favor. Why start a new religion? There are enough religions. There are many different ways of worshiping God. And within Hinduism itself, you can worship practically anything that you want to worship. And so there's no need to go on defining oneself away from others, that we're the new dispensation. We're not like those people. So Sri Ramakrishna was not fond of that, and so here he doesn't say anything directly against them, but he because he loved Keshav Chandra Sen and had other devoted members of the Brahmo Samaj who came to him. But he just says that, well, who knows what the Navavidhan means? Is it a new religion, or is it like one of the 6 philosophies of India or something like that? Who knows? But then he says, but do you know where those who speak of the formless God make their mistake? It is where they say that God is formless only, and that those who differ with them are wrong. And so that was something that, as we know, we've already seen it many times. Sri Ramakrishna would say in various ways, over and over, that yes, worship of the formless God is fine, but don't think that God is only formless and not with form. That the same God who appears as the formless reality also appears in form. And so Swami Vivekananda explained how that's possible. Because from a superficial theological and philosophical standpoint, it would seem impossible. That's why the Christian missionaries who came into India with the Dutch and then more especially with the British, they had such a profound effect on some people in India. They didn't have a profound effect on converting the population, but they created reform movements within Hinduism itself, which began to reject the deities and reject the image worship and all of that. And that's because if you say that God is spirit, and God is not limited by anything, then how could God appear in a form? If God appears before me in a form, it means God is there, but God is not here, God is not there, God is not there, God is not there, God is not here, God is there in the form. So it seems like a ridiculous idea and very easy to argue against, that if God is spirit, and if God is the infinite reality, and if God is infinite, if God is spirit, then God existing in a form is a silly idea. So it had great appeal to many educated people in India at the time, even those who remained Hindu. They wanted to find a way to reconcile Hinduism with this critique of Christianity, which seemed so strong. But Sri Ramakrishna always insisted, and I'll come back to what I said about Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna always insisted that no, God is with form, God is without form, and God transcends both ideas. God is beyond even the idea of form and formlessness. Form and formlessness are two ideas that we can think about, we can handle, we know what form is, we have an idea of what formlessness is, like the air or like space. So those are both concepts that the mind can deal with. But what God really is beyond all concepts. You can't capture it in formlessness or formfulness, neither way, as Sri Ramakrishna would say. So Swami Vivekananda, as I said, he gave the rationale for how God can appear in a form. He said that God is not spatial. God is not spatial. And if you look in the advanced theological thinkers, and that doesn't mean the most modern, it means some of the greatest in the history of Christianity and Islam and Judaism, you'll find that they had the idea that God is infinite and God therefore cannot be divided. And so the whole of God is everywhere. And so that's the idea Swamiji was giving. If God is not spatial, then the whole of God is in every point of space. God can't be divided. So some of God is here, some more of God is here, some more of God is here, some more of God is there. No, the whole of God is in the tiniest point. And everything is within God. So by the standard of our logical thinking, that's irrational. But philosophy can rise above just the rational mind, at least conceptually, and can understand, as these theologians did, that the whole of God must be present everywhere. And so there's no problem with God incarnating in human form like Jesus or Rama or Krishna, or God appearing in the form of Shiva or Vishnu or Kali in front of us also. The whole of God is there, as the whole of God is everywhere. So again, Sri Ramakrishna said that this is the mistake of those who believe in the formless God, that God is only formless and can't be anything else. And he continues, but I know that God is both with and without form, and he may have many more aspects. It is possible for him to be everything. One thing that we should be aware of is, which is pertinent to the topic, it's not exactly what Sri Ramakrishna is saying, but it's pertinent to the topic, that when someone like Sri Ramakrishna, or one of us, if we were blessed with that, have a genuine exalted vision of God in form, it's not that we're just seeing a picture. It's not that we're just seeing like a three-dimensional hologram which is projected out into space, which can be done nowadays. You have a three-dimensional projection of a luminous image. We've all seen such things. And so you have a three-dimensional image of Sri Ramakrishna or Rama or Shiva or Kali projected in front of us. Then that's the vision of God with form. No, that's not the vision of God with form. That's just a hologram. It's not God. If we have an exalted vision of God with form, and I say exalted because we can see the forms of God sometimes in a lower state of mind, not a low state of mind. Itself is very good. But we can see Sri Ramakrishna appearing before us and blessing us and so forth, but we don't really know the infinity of Sri Ramakrishna through that. But an exalted vision of God with form carries with it the knowledge that this is the infinite reality itself, come in this form, full of grace, full of infinite love, the cause of the universe, the source of the universe, and the goal of the universe. That comes with the vision. So it's not just seeing a picture, a three-dimensional picture. It's seeing the reality taking on form. But I know that God is both with and without form, and he may have many more aspects besides form and formlessness. It is possible for him to be everything. One of the arguments against the Abrahamic religions who say that God can only be formless, and Judaism and Islam both say that God can't even incarnate. Christianity has a belief in a one manifestation of God within form, that is, as Jesus, but no other. But Judaism and Islam criticize Christianity as accepting the idea of God taking on human form, which they say is impossible. But an argument against all three of those traditions, which try to limit to what God can be, to the formless reality, is how can you limit, you yourselves are putting a limit to the power of God. You yourselves are putting a limit to what God can be and how God can manifest. So To Ishan, Sri Ramakrishna addresses Ishan. The Chit Shakti, Mahamaya, has become the 24 cosmic principles. One day, as I was meditating, my mind wandered away to Rashki's house. Rashki is a scavenger. I said to my mind, "Stay there, you rogue." The Divine Mother revealed to me that the men and women in this house were mere masks. Inside of them was the same divine power, Kundalini, that rises up through the 6 spiritual centers of the body. So the Chit Shakti means, Chit of course means consciousness, pure consciousness, the absolute reality. And Chit Shakti means the power of consciousness to manifest. So Chit Shakti is Maya, the power to manifest. So the Chit Shakti Mahamaya has become the 24 cosmic principles. The 24 cosmic principles are the principles of Sankhya and of Yoga that say that this universe is made out of 24 principles. That from Prakriti, nature, the principle of objectivity, there's an evolution from that subtlest unitary principle down into all of this. And that there are 24 principles out of which this whole universe has been manifested. So Chit Shakti is manifested as the 24 cosmic principles means Chit Shakti has manifested as all of this that we see in the physical world, in the mental world, in other planes of existence and so forth. All of that is Chit Shakti. So Chit Shakti Mahamaya has become the 24 cosmic principles. One day as I was meditating, my mind wandered away to Rashki's house. He is a scavenger. So a scavenger means someone who cleans the latrines and the toilets and things like that. So in traditional Hindu society, the scavenger was a very low position in society. And so I said to my mind, "Stay there, you rogue." So he's addressing the mind as a rogue because it was wandering. He was meditating, and he found that even Sri Ramakrishna, that's interesting, that even his mind wandered, and it went to the house of Rashki. Who knows why our mind goes where it goes? Suddenly we're thinking of God, and suddenly we're at the grocery store in our minds. And so why the mind goes where it goes, who knows? But even Sri Ramakrishna, his mind wandered one day to Rashki's house. So he said, "You stay there, you rogue, because you've wandered away. You're not paying attention to your meditation. So if that's where you want to go, then stay there." But then, staying there, the Divine Mother revealed to me that the men and women in that house were mere masks. Inside of them was the same divine power, the Kundalini, that rises up through the 6 spiritual centers of the body. So he saw, that's a very strange vision, which Swami Vivekananda mentions this when he was in California, and it's something that's a rare vision, but some have had that, where they see that everyone is God and everyone knows that they're God. Other ordinary people, you see that they're God and that they know that they're God, but somehow they are playing parts here. They're just playing parts here. And our tragedy is that playing a part, we've forgotten that we're playing a part, and we've taken it seriously and identified with it. But in this vision, one sees that everyone is just is the illumined self, playing in divine play in these different forms. It's a very peculiar vision because it contradicts our ordinary experience. And yet at that state, it's a superior way of seeing than we have here. And so when you see that, you know that, well, that is true. That what I'm seeing ordinarily is not true, where everyone seems to be heavy burdened with the oppressive weight of karma and obligation and misery and suffering and all of that. No, everyone is the divine being just playing. But again, somehow our conscious mind has forgotten it. Something within us remembers it, and that's what this person sees in that vision. But the conscious mind has forgotten it, and so we play our roles, thinking that I am the role itself and suffering all of the things that the role brings to my experience. So I said to my mind, "Stay there, you rogue. The Divine Mother revealed to me that the men and women in this house were mere masks. Inside of them was the same divine power, the Kundalini, the coiled serpent power that rises up through the 6 spiritual centers of the body." Then he continues, "Is the primal energy man or woman?" That is Shakti. Usually it's considered as the Divine Mother. But he says, "Is it man or woman?" Once at Kamarpukur, I saw the worship of Kali in the house of the Lahas. The Lahas were a wealthy family that were very fond of Sri Ramakrishna. They put a sacred thread on the image of the Divine Mother. One man asked, "Why have you put the sacred thread on Mother's person?" The master of the house said, "Brother, I see that you have rightly understood the Mother, but I don't know yet whether the Divine Mother is male or female." So what a wonderful idea. Traditionally, the sacred thread is given to a boy, to the male children when they reach a certain age, when they can be initiated into the Gayatri Mantra and taught the Sandhya Vandana ceremony, a daily devotional act that one does in the morning and in the evening at sunrise and sunset. And so the boy is given the sacred thread, which put over the left shoulder and on the right side. So here at the Laha's house, someone saw that they had put the sacred thread on the image of the Divine Mother. And so they asked naturally, "Why did you put that's a male symbol? And so why have you put that on the Divine Mother?" And the person responds that, "I'm glad that you understand the Divine Mother so well, but I haven't been able to figure out whether she's man or woman," meaning that the divine being transcends gender. So, so here he says he actually saw this. He was in Kamarpukur at the Laha's house. He was there and witnessed the worship and saw that they had put on the sacred thread. So it's not just a story. It's an actual anecdote. He continues, "It is said, it is said that Mahamaya swallowed Shiva. When the 6 centers in her were awakened, Shiva came out through her thigh. Then Shiva created the Tantra philosophy." So that's a tradition about the origin of the Tantra philosophy. The Divine Mother swallowed Shiva, and that Shiva, being Shiva, he rose through the 6 centers of the Divine Mother's Kundalini system, awakening all of the chakras, and then he came out through the Divine Mother's thigh, and then gave her the Tantra philosophy. So take refuge in the Chit Shakti, the Mahamaya. Sri Ramakrishna is telling Ishan. Take refuge in the Chit Shakti, the Mahamaya. So again, Chit Shakti and Mahamaya mean the same thing. Ishan, please bestow your grace on me. So we've seen that Ishan was somewhat from a number of the readings. We keep coming across Ishan, and we know that he's someone who is very dear to Sri Ramakrishna and a very sincere spiritual aspirant who came to Sri Ramakrishna often. So please bestow your grace on me, Master. Say to God with a guileless heart, "O God, reveal thyself to me," and weep. Pray to God. "O God, keep my mind away from woman and gold," and dive deep. Can a man get pearls by floating or swimming on the surface? He must dive deep. So that's, of course, is significant. First of all, Sri Ramakrishna, as we know, he often advised people to pray with a sincere heart. Pray with a guileless heart. Sri Ramakrishna loved the quality of guilelessness, childlikeness and guilelessness, simplicity. He loved those qualities. And he would tell people often to learn to talk to God, pray to God with a yearning heart, and so forth. And so here he's telling that to Ishan, and tells him to weep to God. That is, weep not out of misery, but out of this longing for God, weeping for God, out of longing for God, longing for God's grace, recognizing our intense need, existential need for the grace of God. And pray to God, keep my mind away from woman and gold. And then he says, and dive deep. Can a man get pearls by floating or swimming on the surface? He must dive deep. So yes, that's, we read these things, we hear these things, read them. They're often in Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. And yet it's hard to know experientially what he's talking about. How do we dive deep? So most of our spiritual practice is performed on the surface of the mind, just partly mechanically. Yes, there's some devotion in all of us. We wouldn't do anything if we didn't have some devotion. But most of our spiritual practice, our japa, our meditation, our prayer, our singing devotional songs and all of that is done sort of on the surface of the mind with a little bit of attention, but not much attention. But we have to learn to dive deep. When I go to pray to God, to think that I'm actually speaking to God in the darkness, I've closed out the senses, left the world behind, and God is there in the depths of the silence and the darkness. God is there, and to focus my mind on that. And when doing japa, to think that the japa, I'm repeating it from the depths of my being, and repeating it in the depths of my being. And so diving deep is something that we have to learn to do. So again, at first, it's not clear how do you do that? How are you supposed to do it? Well, by trying to do it, we gradually learn how to do it. So it's not something like a recipe where you take a cup of this and a tablespoon of that and a pound of the other and mix it together and cook it for so many minutes at such and such a temperature. There are no physical instructions to go by. It's just something that we have to begin to sense. How to drive the mind deeper in prayer and meditation. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, one must get instruction from a guru. Once a man was looking for a stone image of Shiva. Someone said to him, go to a certain river. There you will find a tree. Near it is a whirlpool. Dive into the water there and you will find the image of Shiva. So Sri Ramakrishna, I say that one must get instruction from a teacher. So Sri Ramakrishna gives that story to show how it is that if we want something, if we want to get something, if we want to know how to do something, we have to go to someone to ask them how to do it. And then they will tell us how to proceed. And so the necessity of a teacher, especially in something as subtle as the spiritual life. In the Hindu tradition, the importance of a teacher is considered very high, the utmost importance in getting a teacher. So Ishan says to this, that is true, sir. And then the master goes on, it is Satchidananda that comes to us in the form of the Guru. If a man is initiated by a human guru, he will not achieve anything if he regards his guru as a mere person. The guru should be regarded as the direct manifestation of God. Only then can the disciple have faith in the mantra given by the guru. Once one has faith, he achieves all. The Shudra Ekalavya learnt archery in the forest before a clay image of Drona. He worshipped the image as the living Drona, That by itself enabled him to attain mastery in archery. So first of all, Sri Ramakrishna often used to say this, that Satchidananda is the Guru. And that he says that when we're initiated by a Guru, if we look on the Guru just as an ordinary human being, then we won't achieve anything. It's like going to an ordinary person and asking for instruction in spiritual wisdom, or to ask them for a mantra or something, they give you one. But if you look on them as just another person like yourself, then what kind of faith are you going to have in what they gave you? You won't have the faith to practice it intensely. And so the idea is, and yes, of course, this is open to abuse, and it has been abused, and we see in the newspaper all of the time abuses of this kind of position of being a guru and using the followers' faith for one's own selfish purposes. That's why one has to be careful in selecting in taking a guru, to see that the guru, as Swami Vivekananda says, to see that their life is pure, to see that they know the essence of the scriptures, and to see that they have no ulterior motive in their teaching, that they're unselfish in their teaching. They're not collecting disciples to make themselves feel good, nor are they collecting disciples because it's their way of feeding themselves and their family as a profession. But the real guru seeks the welfare of the disciple. And as one of our Swamis used to tell me, the true guru wants the disciple to excel himself. The guru wants the disciple to go ahead of where he was able to get, not to hold the disciple back, nor do they have disciples in order to magnify their own image. That is, by collecting a lot of disciples, it makes them look important. No, that's not the sign of a guru. But once we take a guru, the idea is, after we've examined and see that the guru is sincere and unselfish and rightly motivated and pure-hearted, then we have to look on the guru as the divine itself, Satchidananda, God himself working through the guru. If we do that, then we find that whatever the level of advancement of the guru, that God does work through the guru. And so he gives the example of Ekalavya in the Mahabharata. Ekalavya was a Shudra who, because of his low status in society, he was not qualified to be a disciple of Drona, to learn archery, the arts and sciences of warfare, because he was not a Kshatriya, he was not a warrior caste. And so that was not open to him according to the traditions of society of the time. But he had a great hunger for learning archery and other martial arts, and he had great reverence for Drona, the teacher who had rejected him. And so he went to the forest, he fashioned an image of Drona, he worshipped the image every day, meditated on it as his guru, Drona as his guru, and practiced archery. But through his great devotion to Drona, which Drona didn't even know about, he was able to master the art of archery, so much so that there was a danger that he would be even greater than Arjuna, the greatest of Drona's disciples. And so the idea of the story is that because Ekalavya looked on Drona as not just a human being, but he worshipped him, he meditated on him, and practiced archery the best way that he could, that through that worship, the knowledge of archery came to him from Satchidananda, through the idea in his mind of Drona. And so if we look on the teacher as God and try our best to follow their instructions, then the instructions will be profitable. Now that in the West, there's a danger in the West in the misunderstanding of that also. It happens in the East also sometimes, but especially in the West. Because in the West, the way we are trained in education and everything, we think that, well, if the Guru is God, then the Guru knows everything, and whatever the Guru tells me, then that's coming directly from God. So you find people following advice that the Guru meant just as something simple as a suggestion or something, but the disciple takes it, and not about spiritual things, but about something ordinary, and the disciple takes it seriously and gets into trouble by not exercising their own discrimination. So here he's talking about spiritual instruction. He's not talking about going to a spiritual guru and then thinking that everything the guru says about everything is coming directly from the mouth of God. But no, the spiritual instruction given by the guru is coming directly from the mouth of God through the guru. And with that attitude that it's Satchidananda itself which manifests through the words of the guru on spiritual topics, then the instruction takes deep root in the heart. So he continues, don't mix intimately with Brahmin Pandits. Their only concern is to earn money. I have seen Brahmin priests reciting the Chandi while performing the Swasthayana. It is hard to tell whether they are reading the sacred book or something else. They turn half the pages without reading them. All laugh. And so all of us who have witnessed temple puja and things and different places and so forth are quite familiar with this, with the ordinary priests and pandits for whom their priesthood and their panditya, their pandithood, is a way of earning money. They could have been bank managers, or they could have been vegetable sellers or something else, but they took up priesthood because of being in the family line and so forth, and so it's a way of earning their bread. And so we've all seen people in the temple priests who, when they're making offerings, it's just like this. It's just you got to do it, so you just get it done with, and there's no feeling or no bhava or anything like that. And so Sri Ramakrishna is warning him to don't mix with the Brahmin Pandits, because most of them are just in it for the profession. They're only interested in getting their dakshina, their priestly pay and so forth. Their only concern is to earn money. And those of us who have been to traditional temples in India, some of the big temples and so forth, some of them, the priests are extremely aggressive and demanding money and pressuring people for money and trying to coerce and to trick people into giving more money and so forth. So I have seen Brahmin priests, he says, reciting the Chandi while performing the Swasthayana. Swasthayana is a rite from ancient times, a rite which one performs in order to get good things and to avoid misfortunes. And so it's a rite that you perform basically for good fortune, for good luck, and the avoidance of misfortune. And so it's not a spiritual rite, it's just something to keep yourself in a good way. So they're chanting the Chandi, but whether they're chanting the Chandi or doing something else, who knows what they're doing. They're performing the Swasthayana and chanting the Chandi, and they may pass over whole pages without chanting them. That also I have seen with professional priests, where things are going on too long, they just skip over pages of things without going through the whole ceremony. So he can continue. Continues, a nail knife suffices to kill oneself. One needs sword and shield to kill others. That is the purpose of the Shastras. So a nail knife, most people now, and certainly no one in the West knows what a nail knife is, but you still see them in India. Some people still use them rather than nail clippers. It has a long handle with a sharp blade on the end, and you cut your nails by going like that with the knife. You take the blade and cut through the nail like so. And so that's a nail knife. So a nail knife is not meant as a weapon, but that's enough to kill oneself. But if you want to kill somebody else, then you need a sword and a shield. or to use a more accessible Western image, knitting needle is enough to kill oneself, but if you want to kill somebody else, you have to have a sword and a shield. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that the study of the scriptures, mastery of the scriptures, understanding the philosophy and all of that, that may be necessary for one to teach others. Because in order to teach anything, you need to know, you have to have a large picture of the subject. So in order to teach something, you have to know more than what you're teaching. Otherwise, you can't make sense of the subject. And so if you're going to teach others, you have to prepare yourself in order to do so. But to kill yourself, all you need is a simple instrument. To kill yourself, meaning spiritually. Here, killing yourself means attaining enlightenment by transcending the ego. To do that, all you need is a mantra. You get a mantra from a guru and you repeat the mantra, that's all you need. If you're simple enough, and if you're devoted enough, and if you continue enough. So you don't need much to kill yourself. So don't bother with becoming a pandit and telling Ishan, don't mix with Brahmin pandits, because they'll lead you astray. Partly because they're only interested in money and they do what they do because of money, and partly because they study the scriptures also with the idea of making money from their knowledge. That by studying the scriptures and being able to give classes and so forth, then they earn their keep. So he had no use for either. So he continues, one doesn't really need to study the different scriptures. If one has no discrimination, one doesn't achieve anything through mere scholarship, even though one studies all the 6 systems of philosophy. Call on God, crying to him secretly in solitude. He will give all that you need. So, yes, that also Sri Ramakrishna would often say, as we know, that we don't really need to study the different scriptures. As he would say about the Gita, the meaning of the Gita you get by repeating it rapidly over and over again until, as we know in any language that we speak, that when you do that, gradually the syllables get reversed, or you start dividing the word at a different place in the syllable. So Gita, Gita, Tagi, 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 it becomes. And so Tagi indicates Tyagi, which indicates renunciation. And so the meaning of the Gita can be gotten by repeating Gita, 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 Tagi, 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 etc. So we don't need to be masters of the Gita or masters of the scriptures. So again, there is a place for that. There is a place for studying the scriptures, reading the scriptures. Reading the Gita every day is something that Swami Brahmananda used to recommend. So this shouldn't be taken as a criticism of studying the scriptures. Why? Because what happens, and what I've seen, when I've seen people who discouraged others from studying the scriptures and holy books, they said, why are you trying to become a pandit? Sri Ramakrishna discouraged that kind of thing. Put that away. The same person, if they're reading the newspaper all day and reading other books about all kinds of non-spiritual subjects, the same person won't criticize them at all. That's okay. It's only when they pick up a spiritual book, then suddenly they say, well, why are you trying to become a pundit? Well, no, if you're going to read, then read spiritual books. And by reading spiritual books, it helps to keep the mind on a higher level. But don't read them because you want to become a pundit. That's the idea. Don't read them just to enhance your the amount of things that you know. Do it because of a need. Because from studying the scriptures, which give the instructions on how to realize God, I can keep my mind in that mode, and I can learn from what the scriptures are saying how I should live and how I can control my mind. So if we're doing it from a standpoint of spiritual practice, reading the scriptures is good. Swami Vivekananda said that about the order, the monastic order that he founded, that in absence of scriptural study, monastic orders degenerate. And so, yes, and that goes for ordinary people also. So there's a great importance in scriptural reading, but not for becoming a pundit. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna is criticizing. Sri Ramakrishna had heard that Ishan was building a house on the bank of the Ganges for the practice of spiritual discipline. He asked Ishan eagerly, "Has the house been built? Let me tell you that the less people know of your spiritual life, the better it will be for you. Devotees endowed with sattva meditate in a secluded corner or in a forest, or withdraw into the mind. Sometimes they meditate under the mosquito net." So here Sri Ramakrishna says he's heard that Ishan is building a house for practicing spiritual discipline. There's a house where he can go on the bank of the Ganges where others won't see him, where he can practice in solitude spiritual discipline. So he's very obviously delighted by that and asks him if the house has been finished. And then in support of that idea, he tells him that yes, it's good to practice spiritual discipline out of the eyes of other people. Do it in privacy, so that you're not doing it for show, so that you're not practicing spiritual discipline so that other people see you doing it. As we know, Mahimacharan Chakravarti used to hang his tiger skin in Sri Ramakrishna's room. And someone, as I've said in a recent class also, someone one day asked him, whose is that tiger skin? Because tiger skins were considered a excellent asana, a seat to sit on for meditation. And so someone asked Sri Ramakrishna, whose is that? And Sri Ramakrishna said, oh, that belongs to Mahimacharan. He hangs it there so that people coming here will ask me, oh, whose is that? And when I tell them his name, then they will think he's a great yogi. So Sri Ramakrishna just told what Mahimacharan wanted Sri Ramakrishna to tell people, but in a way that undid everything that Mahimacharan had wanted to happen. So he told it in such a way that it showed the hypocrisy of Mahimacharan. So, and Hazra also would often sit outside of Sri Ramakrishna's room telling his beads. So people would pass by him going to see Sri Ramakrishna and to think, oh, what a great sadhaka, spiritual aspirant Hazra is. So in contradistinction to that, Sri Ramakrishna is telling Ishan that, yes, it's good to practice your spiritual discipline in private. So let me stop here. We'll continue where we left off next time. And so let me give announcements. And then if there are any questions, I will deal with those. So 4 announcements. The big announcement right now, of course, is on this Sunday, the 13th, we won't have a service here in Houston. There'll be no service, no live streaming. We will have an open house at the new retreat. And one of you asked if we couldn't live stream that. Well, we can't live stream that because it'd be too much to the logistics of doing that. We're not prepared for that. But sometime in the future, we can make a video of the property and put that on YouTube, certainly, so more people can see it. But this Sunday, for those who can come, we're having an open house at the new retreat in Trinity. We've sent out an email, 2 emails on the mailing list. And we've asked all of you who can come and wish to come, you're most welcome, but please register on Eventbrite. And a couple of people have had trouble for some reason. I don't know what the trouble was. It doesn't matter. They've had trouble registering on Eventbrite. So if you try to register on Eventbrite and it doesn't work or doesn't seem to work, just inform me that Maharaj, I'm coming, or there are 3 of us coming, or 2 of us coming, whatever, just so we have a count of people. So it will begin at 12 o'clock, last until about 2 o'clock. It's just to show you the new property. It's a beautiful property. We're excited to have it, and we want you to be able to see it also. So there'll be a simple program, including lunch. We'll provide lunch for everyone. And so please do come. And if you have lawn chairs, folding chairs that you want to bring with you to sit on, that's fine. We will take some chairs up, but your lawn chair might be more comfortable for you. So if you have a lawn chair and want to bring it, please feel free to do so. And any people who have special diet restrictions can bring their own food. Also, there's no restriction on that. The main food we'll have is pizza, and we'll have some salad and some other things. So, good. And then the other announcements are the usual ones. Tuesday we'll have the Upanishad class, Katha Upanishad at 7:30. Next Thursday, this class again at 11. And the last announcement is that after this Sunday, that is starting from Tuesday the 15th, we will have in-person classes and lectures for people who have been vaccinated. So if you've been fully vaccinated and want to come to the classes and lectures in person here in the hall, that we will open for that. And in the beginning, we ask that people wear masks when they come into the temple for the in-person classes and lectures. Gradually, we'll relax that restriction. But in the beginning, we just want to start safely. So that's why we're starting with people who are vaccinated and people who wear masks. Yes. Vision, okay. So the question is, if I could explain something about vision, what kind of state of mind is that, etc. Well, there are many visions, but there are visions which are just ordinary signs. There's nothing wrong with them, they're good. Say if I have a vision of Sri Ramakrishna or Holy Mother or Shiva or something, and I find it inspiring, then that's good. But it's not a high vision. So that sometimes happens just because of our devotion, just because of it's partly from our side and partly a revelation from God's side, God's grace, showing us that we are on the right way. But when I speak of visions, usually I'm speaking of a more exalted experience. And so that comes, sometimes it can come at the beginning of our spiritual life. There's sometimes people who have a vision which leads them into the spiritual life, a real vision. But a higher vision is one that when we have it, we feel that it's not the product of imagination. It comes spontaneously. So it's not that I was thinking and trying to see Sri Ramakrishna so much that maybe I talked myself into producing a hallucination. No, it comes spontaneously. When it comes, there's deep inspiration that may last for days. We feel uplifted for days. The mind suddenly feels concentrated. We feel that inside there's been some sort of transformation. That's not realization, that's a very high thing, but there's some amount of transformation inside. We feel that the experience has somehow changed us and changed the nature of the mind somewhat. We may go back to being our plain old selves afterwards, but for some time the mind suddenly feels well behaved and inspired and so forth. So that comes because of inner development, and there are many different types of vision. So what it is, we can't really be said, except that one suddenly perceives something which one normally doesn't see, and one knows that this is something which is not happening because I was trying to make it happen. It happened as like a gift, an act of grace. And so such visions, again, don't come on demand. They come as a gift of God's grace. So, okay. So based on the saying, when the disciple is ready, the guru will appear. What if several gurus come into one's life with slightly different teachings? Can one follow them all? Good question. Yes, yes. So sometimes, yes, sometimes nothing appears that we want, whether it's material or spiritual, and sometimes there's a overabundance of things, and then we don't know how to choose. So no one, a guru in our tradition, in some traditions and in some Tibetan Buddhist traditions and in some Hindu traditions, people go to different teachers and get different initiations and things. But in our tradition, we don't do that. Guru is one. Now, a person may have various upagurus, that is subsidiary gurus, from which we get a lot of teaching and a lot of training and so forth. But the Mula Guru is the one who gives us initiation, and that in our tradition is for a lifetime. We don't do that now and then later go to somebody else and say, well, could you initiate me again or something like that. No, the initiation is once for a lifetime, and the guru who gives initiation is our guru. So yes, we can take inspiration from other teachers, but not follow other gurus, because teachers and systems of teaching are different, and they're not always harmonious. And so one teacher, like if you went to some teachers of ISKCON, they will tell you that in the present age, meditation doesn't work. And so it's just chanting Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, etc. Well, that's a good teaching. That's authentic teaching. That's good. But it's very different from what you get from us. And then if you go to a Goenka Vipassana center, they'll tell you, if you go for a Vipassana retreat, they'll tell you you have to sign something saying that I will not repeat mantras or do any other practice. I will only practice Vipassana. But if you've received mantra initiation, you have to do that every day. How can you sign something saying I'm not going to practice my mantra of meditation for the 2 or 3 weeks that I'm here in the meditation retreat? And so you have to have one guru, follow that guru's instructions, and take inspiration from others. And things, insofar as they don't contradict what you're following from your guru, that you can take also. But one has to be careful and not try to follow all teachers. So how do you know which one is yours? Well, that I can't tell you. No one can tell you. That you have to decide by. You don't have to be in a hurry. You can listen to all. You can look at all. You can see the following of all and see what their influence on other people is and so forth, and then come to a decision. But in the midst of all of it, you can pray to God. Please show me the teacher that is right for me. We can always appeal to God for help in every situation where we don't know what to decide, and pray that that I make the right decision. So those are all. Yes, so there's Surenji is saying that many people go from place to place, from teacher to teacher, to YouTube presenter to YouTube presenter, and they don't seem to be convinced, or they get confused by listening to so many different people. And that's possible. So one has to have a strong center, what is called nishtha. One has to have nishtha, that is a determination that this is my path. This is what I'm going to follow. And then if you find other things interesting, supportive of what you're doing, that's good. There's no harm in that. The harm is when you listen to this, and then you listen to that, and then you listen to this, and then you listen to that, and subtle differences in the different teachings, and you don't have a center of your own. You don't know what is for me to follow. Different people are telling me different things, and today I like this, tomorrow I like this, the next day I like this. No, you have to find, this is my tradition, this is my path, this is my practice, this is my teacher. And then you can incorporate other things into that, but this is where you hold tight. You don't leave this. Other things you take in that you can harmonize with this, make sure that they're not contradicting this, then you can have other influences that inspire you and so forth. But this you have to keep as your center. Otherwise, it will lead to confusion, and it will lead to conflicting advice, following conflicting advice. Now, nowadays, there are many people who follow more than one tradition, and that can be okay as long as you do it properly. That is, there are people who are both Christian and Vedantist, many such. In fact, I myself have known several Christian ministers active in the ministry, and even Catholic priests who are an active Catholic priest, and several Christian Protestant ministers of different denominations who were initiated Vedantists at this as well. And so they harmonized the two, and that is good. There's no problem. There have been Jewish rabbis. In fact, I helped a Jewish rabbi friend of mine get initiation. He's still a rabbi. He still teaches as a rabbi, but he's an initiated Vedantist as well, who practices with the mantra and everything. There was a conservative rabbi in New York City who was well known, and he became a disciple of our Swami Pavitrananda and continued as a rabbi. He couldn't tell his congregation that he was also a Vedantist because they wouldn't understand. But that influenced his teaching as a rabbi. And the same with these Christian ministers, it influenced their teaching. In fact, an interesting story, there was a congregational minister, Andrew Limke, and that I met, and I knew his son and daughter-in-law very well. In fact, I knew three of his sons, but one of them very well, who was an initiated devotee also. So Andrew Limke remained a congregational minister, but he was initiated by Swami Nikhilananda back in the 1940s, when the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna first came out, and he saw the review. I believe it was in the New York Times, but in one of the big national newspapers of record. He read a review of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna when it was first published, and he was so impressed. And he himself was going through something of a spiritual crisis, though he was a Protestant minister. And so he went to Swami Nikhilananda. He traveled to New York, met with Swami Nikhilananda, became a disciple in time, and was close to him the rest of his life. In fact, he used to go to New York in the summertime. Every summer he would spend time with Swami Nikhilananda at Thousand Island Park. And when Swami Nikhilananda would travel and couldn't be in his center to give lectures, he would invite Reverend Limke to come and give the Sunday talks at his center in New York City. So he was a very close disciple and a congregational minister. When he decided to retire from a church in Allegan County, Michigan, and in the town of Allegan, a congregational church there, he decided to retire. The church tried and tried to find a replacement, but they told him that everyone we go to, we've thrown out a wide net to congregational ministers all over, but no one teaches the way that you teach. We don't understand. No one says the things the way you say them. And so he didn't explain that the reason that is that I am a Vedanta devotee, a Christian, but a Vedanta devotee. And so all of my teaching is influenced by Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and the Vedanta tradition. And so you're not going to find that. So he couldn't explain that to them. But they were mystified why it is that other ministers, their teaching was so different from Reverend Limke's teaching. So if we can do that, if we have more than one tradition, or we're born into another tradition, but we take up Vedanta, for instance, if we can find the point of harmony, and there is a point of harmony between every two traditions, then we can straddle the two worlds harmoniously. But we have to do that very consciously and carefully, because otherwise it does lead to confusion. If one day you're saying I'm a sinner, and only through God's grace can I be saved because I'm such a wretch, and then the next day you're at the Vedanta Society saying that I am pure and divine by nature and everything, well, you're going in two different directions. So you have to know where your center is and how to bridge these contradictions that you find between traditions. These contradictions come because each tradition is looking from a particular standpoint. And so the standpoints are contradictory, just as in the famous example of paths going up to a mountain. You can't follow all of the paths at the same time to the top of the mountain. The perspective on the mountain itself is contradictory between one path and another. The way you see the path and the mountain is different from each perspective. So if you straddle traditions, which is possible, is difficult, but it is possible, then you just have to be careful to know where your center is and how to interpret the apparently contradictory teachings of the two different traditions. For most, it's best to follow just one tradition. That is the easiest and the simplest for most of us. And just we can get inspiration from others. So with that, I'll close and give the closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow in adoration to Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, eternal, infinite, the worshipful Supreme Lord who took on human birth out of compassion for all. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.